Hello, my name is Michaela, and I have not made an MBTI video in ages, so I thought, with 2022 over, I would give some book recommendations featuring some books that I read during the 2022 year, even though these were not necessarily published during 2022. So my authority here is absolutely nothing. MBTI itself is so fluid and ambiguous, it's just for fun. So, these may not actually be good books that you might enjoy, but I just kind of was thinking what, based on stereotypes of each MBTI type, what would they most enjoy? And in all honesty, I would recommend reading all of these books. Even if they're not books that I rated 5 stars on Goodreads, I still think that these are all really good books. So starting off with the extroverted thinking dominant MBTI types. So that is ESTJ and ENTJ. I'll start off with ESTJ. I chose the C. I did not put down the authors in my script thing that I made here. That's kind of an issue. I put down for the ESTJ, The Island of Sea Woman by Lisa C. This basically follows 2 girls who are friends. It goes through many years. It's a historical fiction. It's set on an island off the coast of Korea where the women work in these diving collectives and they've trained their lungs to stay underwater longer and they're more resistant to the cold. So there's just a lot of culture to this story. There's a lot of history because it's set during colonialism and it goes through decades worth of history. I think that the ESTJ, of course, would enjoy these elements, but most importantly, it's a story of overcoming adversity. And, the ESTJ is a problem solver. They look for solutions. That's how they're wired to see the world, is to kind of think about improvements and how can I fix things. So I think that they'd really appreciate and respect this story of resilience. It's also just a really powerful story of friendship and speaks to loyalty, which again, the ESTJ really values loyalty. And hopefully, if you're an ESTJ, you'd like it. The other extroverted thinking user is the ENTJ. And for the ENTJ, I chose Book Lovers by Emily Henry. If we're going off stereotypes, you might at first be thinking, why did you choose this contemporary romance for an ENTJ? Because they're stereotypically oh, let's read a business book or something, which is so blatantly stereotyped. But I was thinking Book Lovers because I think it's hard for someone with this personality type to find a romance that they can connect to, where the characters aren't just spontaneous and just going after, in a more lustful way, someone that they first meet. And not that the ENTJ can't enjoy a romance like that, but I think they might appreciate this version, which basically follows these 2 co-workers, and they're in the book editing and publishing industry. They both happen to be staying in the same town, and they don't really like each other, so it kind of follows that trope. But I really enjoyed the way that these characters interacted because it just felt very level-headed and realistic to me. And I think that the ENTJ would appreciate that because they're very organized people based on their extroverted thinking. They also are ones to be very mindful of how they go about doing things thanks to their auxiliary function. It's not often you get 2 romance characters that behave like this, and that's why the ENTJ might like it. For the introverted thinkers, starting with the the ISTP, I chose The Stand by Stephen King. And this is a long novel, but it's basically after a super flu wipes out most of the population. The setting is an apocalyptic world, and people are kind of divided into the schism of good and evil. And I think that that's kind of the primary reason the ISTP would like this, because it's really a story. And when I say story, I mean it follows all of the right methods for an action-packed story. And I think that the ISTP would be really interested in that. They're interested in something that's plot-heavy. They'd be probably less interested in something that's a bit more passive with more underlying action than exciting action. And The Stand is about exciting action, which would appeal to the combination of this internal thinking that they have, which would be fascinated by the good and evil kind of schism. But then also their extroverted sensing, their auxiliary function, will be attracted to this very fast-moving and scary concept of a world that's been exposed to a superflu that kills so many people. And then for the INTP, I chose Contact. This is Carl Sagan's only fictional novel, I believe, and it basically follows this really intelligent woman. Her name's Ellie, and it explores what would happen if we made contact with extraterrestrials. Not only is this book a science fiction that deals with a lot of astrophysics, which alone I think would appeal to INTPs who inherently enjoy learning about new things, but it's also a story about answering questions. And I read my old Goodreads review to draw from these questions that asks can there be reconciliation between faith and science? What is belief and how does it shape society? To what extent are humans primed to dismiss the truth or simply devise conspiracies that obscure it? What, ultimately, is the most life-changing experience? Otherworldly contact or mere interpersonal contact with loved ones? INTPs like to think, and they want a book that will make them think. And you can't read this book without thinking. Let's move on to the feelers, starting with extroverted feeling, the ESFJ. I chose The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is set in the 1940s, and it's titled after a black girl growing up who longs for blue eyes, and the story basically follows racism and society standards for beauty. I think that the ESFJ, they're intrigued by books that explore humans because they are so into human relationships and contact and the dynamics between people. This novel not only does that, but it appeals to the ESFJ's capacity for sympathy because the book has such a nauseating clarity that it describes these relationships. And when I say relationships, I mean this novel really delves into the most inhumane, basest, most appalling aspects of human relationships. It's really just such a powerful novel, and the ESFJ will just connect so well to the themes that are expressed in here because it's so about humans. For the ENFJ, oh, I love this book. Middlemarch by George Eliot. This book is a behemoth of a book. Middlemarch, what the book is named after, is alive in itself. It's about like the hive mind sort of structural ideas to society that, you know, make people believe one thing, or it's what causes gossip and it's what affects relationships and makes people act the way they do. And the ENFJ, because they have extroverted feeling as their primary function, I think that they'll be really intrigued by how these characters interact, and also is such a slice of life in a way too of when this was written, and I think it was 1871. I think they'd really enjoy that. George Eliot is just such an incredible writer. I absolutely love her writing. It's so realistic. Like, that word doesn't encompass the amount of insight that she has on the human psyche. I think that the ENFJ, who, like the ESFJ, they both have the dominant function of extroverted feeling, and they're interested in those interpersonal relationships between humans. I think that this novel, Middlemarch, sheds a lot of light on why people will behave the way they do with other people. Now, the introverted feelers, for the ISFP, I chose We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is actually a young adult novel, but it's short and it's captivating. It's basically about these four friends and their family dynamics. They stay on this island, and it's very ritzy and elitist, and it explores the prejudices white elitism produces. Not only is this a novel and a story, but it's also kind of poetry. And that's what makes it so interesting, is the cadence of the writing is very lyrical almost. And I think that it will intrigue the ISFP. The ISFP has these first of all, these inner morals with their introverted feeling. That kind of guides how they process information, and a lot of this book is about processing morality and trying to change the morality of others. Yeah, so really it's poetry in novel form, or novel in poetry form, and I think that the ISFP will like that. So for the INFP, I chose The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The last book I described for the ISFP was poetry in novel form, or vice versa. This one, The Picture of Dorian Gray, I think is novel in art form, or vice versa. It's not only artsy in the writing, but it's about art. It's about this boy, Dorian Gray. He's young and beautiful, and essentially he kind of like exchanges his soul for eternal life. There's a portrait of him, however, that reflects what he actually is, what he actually looks like, especially as he sins more and more. So I think that the internal feeling of the INFP will just absolutely devour the questions in this novel, especially those about sin and purity. I think it's also going to appeal to this aesthetic appetite that the INFP has, because as I said before, it's not only a beautiful story, but it also just explores the beauty of language too. I chose for the ESTP, Serve the People by Jan Lienka. It's a very short novel. To be honest, it doesn't have as much plot to it, in my opinion, but I thought that the ESTP would really like it because it's very political and satirical, and it follows this chaotic romance between the wife of a division commander and a soldier in 1967 in communist China. I think that it's very engrossing. I think that the writing itself is alive, very alive, between the style of writing itself and then the innuendos and the romance and the symbolism. And because it's so alive, I think it's just going to capture the attention of the ESTP. That's kind of just the reasoning I had for it. I don't know if there was anything else. Okay, moving on. So for ESFP, I chose Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. But essentially, it's a time travel romance. It's about a woman who time travels back in time to Scotland. I read the first book. I actually didn't read the others, but I kind of want to read the others now. I didn't as soon as I finished it because it was a long book, but now I want to read the others. But I think that the ESFP is going to find it exciting because even though it is a romance, it's also it's Scotland. Like, it's Scotland many years ago, and That's key for the ESFP is adventure, because they have extroverted sensing as their dominant function. They need an adventure that's going to absorb them and make them feel like they are also adventuring, because appealing to their senses is kind of like the core idea of captivating the ESFP. The introverted sensors, I chose for the ISFJ, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. You know, the ISFJ has this rosy vision of the past, I think, often, because of their introverted sensing, and they rely on that reverence for the past. But the ISFJ, I think, will really love how Victorian this novel is and the gothic elements of it, and the fact that it's such a Jane Austen formula, that they'll appreciate that tried and true sort of way that Jane Austen writes if they've read Jane Austen before. Also, the ISFJ has a deep appreciation of interpersonal relationships because their auxiliary function is extroverted feeling, and Jane Austen incorporates a lot of subtleties into her language, subtleties in the way that people speak to one another. So the dialogue is going to be vastly entertaining to the ISFJ, and also just the nuanced dynamics between all of the characters. And then for the ISTJ, I chose Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. So this tells the story of the son of a preacher. It's kind of a coming of age in a way, but it's about identity and racism and his family members. ISTJs are very reflective people. They like to think methodically, and I think that this book kind of does that in a way. It's all about the process behind how this main character comes to realize himself. And because it's slow moving but deep like that, I think that it will appeal to the way that the ISTJ thinks. For the ENTP, I chose The Martian by Andy Weir. A lot of people have seen the movie featuring Matt Damon, and if you have, hopefully you liked it. I thought it was a really fantastic movie. It's about this man who gets stranded on Mars, and he's brilliant and he's witty, and he's got to try to find a way to survive. The way that the story is told definitely incorporates a lot of scientific language, and I think that the ENTP won't be put off by that. I think that they'd like the challenge of trying to understand this new thing, because they love just like finding these new topics and trying to understand them. And their extroverted intuition will be definitely entertained by the idea of survival and kind of exploring these possibilities of how am I going to not die in the Martian landscape. That, and then again, the main character, he's got a really great sense of humor, and the ENTP I've found tends to also appreciate a good sense of humor, and I think that they'll enjoy that. For the ENFP, I chose Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. It's a classic mystery. It's just really a classic mystery. It's about this reporter, and she goes back to her hometown to investigate these murders. Or not to investigate them, but to write about them, report on them. And the reason I chose a classic mystery for the ENFP is extroverted intuition. They like to search for answers and search for in their mind of, oh, it could be this, 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 or this. You know, who is the bad guy? And I think that a mystery just gives the ENFP so many opportunities to do that. And also the ENFP, they like to have a fast-paced novel. They'll just plow through it so fast because I think that hopefully it would be entertaining for them. It keeps you guessing at the same time, but it also delves into complex family relations. Again, appealing to the ENFP because they have introverted feeling as their auxiliary function. For the INTJ, it's so hard because I'm an INTJ, so I just was like, okay, well, I'll choose, again, a book that I like. Because that's good reasoning. And I chose The Razor's Edge by William Somerset Maugham. The book is a narrative, and it follows several characters. One of the central ones, his name's Larry, and he's kind of pursuing all these existential questions. I really love this book. The characters just have so much depth and meaning. My stepsister just visited for a little bit, so if the camera position and lighting has changed, it's just because I took a pause from filming for a little bit. I don't remember where I was. INTJ, I know, but basically all of the characters, this book is an onion. It's such an onion. It has so much meaning. There's so many different layers to it, and all of the characters are just so symbolic and intricate. I think that the INTJ would really enjoy reading it slowly, and to really sift through to get all of these different meanings from the text that all kind of lead back to these philosophical questions. And then lastly, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig for the INFJ. This is about a woman who gets to experience and live through possible other lives of herself. So like parallel universes, like what if she had decided to do this after college instead of this career track? And what if she decided to go with a friend to Australia? How would her life have panned out differently based on all of these decisions she's made in her life? And since reading this, both my mom and I, because I got her to read it as well, we both keep referencing like, oh, Midnight Library moment, like if we're making a big decision in our lives and, we don't know how it's going to change the course of our future. And I think that this is why it would be so appealing to the INFJ. The INFJ thrives off of their introverted intuition, which is internally kind of processing all of the different possibilities and outcomes of a situation. But paired with the extroverted feeling of their auxiliary function, it's also deeply about the human interactions that are involved in those possibilities. And that's what the Midnight Library is all about at its core. And I think that the character Nora would really just resonate with any INFJ. This book on the list is is actually probably the one I would say, like, obviously I'm recommending it to INFJs, but I would say every single person should read The Midnight Library. Fantastic book. So yeah, these are the books I would recommend to each of these 16 Myers-Briggs personality types. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you find a good book to read, even if it's not the one that I've listed for your personality type. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.